So, in this last class of the second module, we will introduce the different types of data that are stored in an ERP system, and then we will try to identify the basic data elements that are common to many processes. Data in a ERP system are used, of course, to represent the physical system in which process steps and represent the basic unit of analysis for understanding their functioning. In particular, in ERP system, three different types of data exist. On one side, we have organizational data, that are related to the structure of the enterprise. On the other side, we have master data, so organizational data related to the structure of the enterprise. Master data, which instead related to the different elements characterizing the business processes. And transaction data related instead to the different steps that are executed within the different processes. Let's analyze a bit the characteristic of organizational data. Organizational data are used to represent the structure of an enterprise. Example of organizational data and structure of an enterprise are like companies, are like subsidiaries, are factories, warehouses, storage areas, sales regions, and so on. In particular, there are also different terms to refer to organizational data. We can also hear about organizational data as organizational elements or levels. And they are usually hierarchically organized. Because as we can see from the slides, we can highlight essentially three levels: the client, the company, the enterprise, the companies, and the plant. Coherently with what we saw with the description of the GBI case, this level represents also the level in which the company is represented through the organizational chart. But now let's see more in detail each of one. Let's start with the client. The client is the highest organizational level in SAP ERP because it represents an enterprise consisting of many companies or subsidiaries. So the client group all the subsidiaries that are related to one company. If we carry on with the case that we already analyzed in previous classes, Nestlé, for example, is the main client company, is the master enterprise of several sub-companies, such as, let's say, Purina, such as L'Oreal, such as Wonka, such as Garnier, and so on. The company code, instead, represents each company within the enterprise, so within the client. Each company code substantially represents a separate legal entity, and it is the central organizational element of financial accounting, meaning that each financial accounting document will be realized according to each company code, so each legal separate entity. And of course, these financial statements are required for legal reporting purposes and need to be maintained at the company level. Of course, a client can have multiple company codes, but of course, the company code must belong only to one client. If we then step to the plant level, we can see that, of course, as we already, addressed in some past classes, a plant represents an organizational element that, let's say, performs multiple functions and it is relevant for several processes. We can define essentially a plant as a facility as some of, the following function can be performed, like manufacturing of products or realization of service, stock of material and use of this material for distribution, where production planning is carried out, or maintenance on assembly line or production line is performed. There are different type of plants. A plant can be a factory, can be a warehouse, can be a distribution center, can be an office, or can be another an headquarter, and so on. And can be a part of a building, can be an entire building, can be a collection of buildings. It's not just don't stuck with the definition of plant. It's essentially an organizational element which is crossed by multiple processes. If we keep the Nestlé example, you can see from this representation that for Nestlé Food and Beverage in particular, because this representation is related to Nestlé Food and Beverage, you have different factories here, each one representing these different distribution centers, which are also factories, which are specialized by products. And in ERP, each of these factory is represented as is considered as a different plant and as its code in order to be managed and to be crossed by the different Nestlé processes. If we refer to our GBI case, and if we can recall what we discussed so far, we can remember that GBI consists of two companies, one in the United States and one in Germany, under which the main enterprise is formed. Of course, GBI is represented by a client code, so the enterprise client, the GBI Enterprise, and each of these two sub-companies are represented by a company code. In particular, you can see USOO and DEOO, the US company and the German company. Then, as we've discussed, GBI operates through 5 plants for, let's say, the storage and the manufacturing of bicycles. In particular, 3 plants are located in the US, in Dallas, in San Diego, and in Miami, while 2 plants are located in Germany, respectively in Heidelberg and in Hamburg. In particular, we see that the Heidelberg plant serves both for manufacturing and the distribution center, while instead for Hamburg, we have that this plant is only a distribution center. So we have 5 different facilities and 5 different plants coded in the ERP system. Then the second type of data is master data. Master data represents essentially all the elements that are associated with the different business processes. For example, example of master data are, let's say, material, if the procurement process involves buying materials. Are vendors, as to buy material, we need to have vendor selling this type of product. And of course, we have customer to which final products needs to be delivered. In particular, we can distinguish the master data in 3 different categories. We have general data, which are essentially, let's say, common across the different company under the same client. Then we have financial data, which are instead company specific, because financial data are related to the single company. And finally, we have function specific data, meaning data which are, let's say, involved for a specific process or a specific function. Like, for example, suppliers or vendors are specific of the procurement process or the procurement area. Customer are specific for the demand fulfillment process, so for the marketing area, and so on. Of course, the most commonly used master data in an organization is what we call the material master. Because materials, of course, are used in numerous processes, so are those data that are shared among a very high number of processes. Materials are parts from vendor, are manufactured by production system, are sold to customer, are planned by the planning department, and more. They are also used for maintenance services, they are used for project management, and so on. So the material master data, we can see that it is one of the most complex and extensively database which is used and which is carried on in an ERP system. Of course, not all the data are used and viewed by all the process in the same way, but each process use the materials data differently, and of course need to have different views on this type of material. In particular, we can see that data are grouped based on the process, the material type, and the organizational elements. This is exactly what this figure tries to show you. Material master, the material master, we see represented in the center, in the center of the screen. In the center of the screen, is used across different processes. And it includes a very large amount of data. This data, to manage this data, of course, the material master groups this type of information into different categories or views. Of course, each one of these views is relevant to one or more processes. For example, basic data such as the material number, the description, the weight, the unit of measure, of course, are cross-process and so are relevant to almost all the processes and are stored in a particular area. Instead, other views are set only for certain processes. For example, the sales data and the purchasing data include all the data to the material which are relevant for the purchasing process and the sales process. For example, for procurement, we can have the vendor and the vendor description and the purchase order. For the sales process, we have the customer number or the price of the material or the product, which is just relevant for this type of process. Of course, that data are needed by different processes also according to their nature. So we have different views on the material master, but then in these views, of course, some selection is made according to the material types. The most four common material types are raw materials, semi-finished goods, finished goods, and traded goods. Let's analyze this more in detail. Raw materials, which are coded in SAP ERP as ROH, are all those materials purchased from an external source, so a supplier, and used then for the production process. And they are not seen directly in their nature from final customer. And so, let's say the material master for raw materials will include data related to procurement and production, but not fulfillment. Then we have semi-finished goods, which are coded as HALB, are typically produced by the company from other materials, like for example the raw materials, and are used then to produce the finished goods. So, related to the SAP ERP, data related to semi-finished goods are essentially included and viewed by the production process. Finished goods, coded as FERT, are instead created by production process from other materials in order to realize the final products, and these other materials can be raw materials and semi-finished goods. They are generally, of course, not purchased because it is the company that will use these finished goods, and so we can conclude that the material master, including information about the finished goods, will include data related to production, related to fulfillment, but not linked to the procurement process. Finally, trading goods, HAWA, are essentially raw materials, semi-finished goods, but also finished goods, which are purchased from an external vendor and resold directly to the customer without, let's say, any further manufacturing activity. So, as the company does not perform any additional processing of the material prior to selling goods, the material master for trading goods will include data linked to procurement and the selling process, but not to the production process. Of course, as you can see from these slides, there are numerous other types of materials, and in particular here you can see the list within SAP ERP, and in particular you can see the list with the acronyms SAP ERP. We have just analyzed finished goods, semi-finished goods, trading goods, and materials. As you can see, there are a lot. Of course, related to the material type, there is also the concept of the material group, which can try to group similar materials with, let's say, similar characteristics. For example, all of the materials used in the production of bicycles, for example, tires and tubes, which are raw materials, and wheel assemblies, which are semi-finished goods, can be included in one material group called production. Production, in order to produce a product, we need the tires, we need tubes, and we need wheel assemblies. This realizes the concept of the material group. The material group with a certain logic, so clustered with a certain logic, materials which have similar characteristics. In the retail industry, for example, material groups represent new categories such as footwear, clothes, beverage, which can be grouped together because they mean that they can be managed as process practices collectively. The processes, the procurement, the production, the delivery process of materials within the same group share the same. Here you can see, let's say, the GBI structure. We already discussed about this, but here you can see the two divisions of GBI technique, bicycle, and accessory. Here you see the different kinds of products which are aligned within the two divisions, so here you have the product, protective and accessory, and here you have different materials which are coded according to ERP convention, ERP acronyms in, let's say, the GBI piece of materials. And then, after the material data, we have also what we call the transaction data. Transaction data essentially reflects the consequences of executing processes or transactions. Processes are made of steps, and each step can generate some data or need some data. So, these data are coded in ERP as transaction data. Example of transaction data are dates, quantities, prices, payment, delivery terms, and so on. Of course, as we can see, the transaction data as are related to the process functioning are no other than a combination of organizational data, master data, and situational data. So, by combining, for example, some organizational elements related to client, company code, and sales, if you refer to the sales order creation, the master data, so the customer and material, and the situational data, so date, time, and person, we realize the transaction data related to the sales order creation. So the combination specific value of organizational elements, master data, and situational data realize the transaction data, in this case, sales order creation. This figure exactly shows what we discussed before. So transaction data is composed and arises from the combination of different organizational, situational, and master data which are recorded in the system. Of course, SAP ERP can use then several type of documents to record transaction data. Some of these documents are created or used while the process is executed, and other record instead data after the process steps are complete. Of course, the documents that are generated and used while the process is being executed are named transaction documents. Can be example requisition, purchase order, sales order creation, invoice, delivery documents, and so on. While instead, documents that record data that are generated after the process are financial accounting documents, management accounting documents, and material documents. Financial accounting documents substantially, include, let's say, financial information and record the financial impact after a process has been executed. Same management accounting documents record the impact on the cost accounting side of executing a particular process. And finally, the material documents record all the material movements that have been implied by the execution of the process, like materials that have been received for a vendor or shipped to a customer, and so update information on inventory and materials also in progress. This is an example of a transaction document, so a purchase order. A transaction document typically consists of two sections, a header section and a detail or line item section. The top part of the document is the header. In this case, you see that the three materials included in the purchase order are knee pads, elbow pads, and off-road helmets. And then they are reported in the line items. The header includes data such as purchase order number, the date, the purchase order number, the date, the payment terms, the destination of the shipment, and the type of shipment. While instead, in the data in the line items, such as reports data such as the quantity and the price, the quantity requires and the price required for these items, and of course the total amount of the purchase order. Of course, a document can include multiple line items, as the case of this purchase order. Finally, we understand that SAP ERP can work on several and huge amount of data. It's worthwhile to spend some words about possible option for reporting in order to analyze in a smarter way the terabyte of information which is stored in ERP system. With reporting, we generally intend, an action which describes the ways that user can view and analyze both transaction and historical data present in ERP in order to make to take decision, but also to analyze more in detail these transaction data which are stored in the system. And that's why SAP ERP offers essentially two types of reporting. We already talked about this. Simple list of data, which just show the historical data which was recorded on the system and documents, but also analytics, so further analysis of data already stored in the system. And of course, this depends on the environment in which the report is generated. We already discussed about this, but if the report is generated within the transactional system, OLTP, of course, just some list of existing data and existing information will be shown, while instead, if we are within the informational or analytical system, we have the opportunity to further analyze this information and so use OLAP in order to generate some more strategic information and elaboration of data. In particular, we see that within the, let's say, transactional reporting, we can choose among the work list and the online list, while instead, when we are within the analytical system, we have analytics. For the purpose of this course, we will just limit the views of reporting on work list and online list, so just to the transaction system functioning. Here we can see an example of let's say an extraction, let's say a strategic extraction of data from the ERP system. In particular, we have already told about the fact that all app systems start from transaction data and create what we now can call information structure. So store information in data warehouse through information structure. Information structure are multiple fields that capture and store specific transaction data in an aggregated and summarized form that then enables user to analyze the data as needed. For example, in this case, you see that by the extraction of data from the different database management system, the data warehouse stores data, aggregate data about the date, the customer, the material, the sales quantity, and the sales amount of transaction executed within the ERP system. In particular, from this example, you can see that information structure is defined in terms of three features. The character, of course, the period, so the timeline, the characteristics, and the key figure, the key figures. Characteristics are essentially the object for which the data are collected, and can be organizational data such as plant and sales organization, and master data such as materials, vendor, and customer. So it can be organizational or master data. In this case, we have both customer and material, so we have just master data, and no organizational data are included in this information structure. And we can include up to 9 characteristics, so we can add up to 9 fields to be aggregated. Key figures are instead, we can call, let's say, performance measures of the transaction, like sales quantity, like sales amount, also number of delivery, and so on. So the key figure associated to these characteristics. In this way, instead of recording the details of orders and invoices, so in separate documents, because these numbers are stored separately in different documents, like in this case it will be invoices to the customers, or order issued by a customer. In this way, key figure maintain statistical summaries for each field. This is an example of one level of aggregation of transaction data. And of course, it's up to the decision maker to understand how to aggregate this information. This is just an example. You can store and aggregate information coming from the transactional database as you want, and then after you have created the data warehouse made by this field, you can then execute some business intelligence software in order to elaborate further analysis on this. For example, if this would be the materials purchased from the vendor, associated to the vendor, associated to the quantity, associated to the purchasing price paid for this quantity, you can, for example, through business intelligence software, perform a spend analysis, try to understand which category is affecting most your cost of goods sold, for which vendor, how to classify vendor, and so on. Stepping back to the transactional reporting, the reporting coming from transactional data, we have essentially two different type of reporting: work list and online list. Work list identify tasks that are scheduled to be completed in a process. So we are executing a process, and we want to know which tasks need to be executed. Example are picking due list, so orders that need and products that need to be picked up. Billing due list, so orders that need to be processed in order to then generate the bill. And finally, delivery due list, so product that need to be delivered to the final customer. For example, you will find the simulation that I'm going to upload, an example of how to display a picking list that will show all the customer orders that must be prepared for delivery, so that they can then be shipped in a timely manner. This is how, let's say, a picking list in this case, but how the work list look like. I mean, in this case, you see displayed three orders that must be picked to ensure that they will be delivered on time. And if you want to, then you will see. But if you want to have detail on picking the orders to be picked up, you just select the field, and information about the order will appear on the screen. Online list instead displays a list of master data such as materials, vendors, purchasing info record, and documents such as transaction documents, financial accounting documents, and material documents that instead are generated during the execution of the process. So work list related to activities that need to be executed, while online list generate list of master data and documents instead generated during the execution of a process. Let's say the appearance and the content of these lists are defined using selection parameters and scope of list parameters. As you can see here, you just select what you want to be shown on screen, and then it's up to you to define the view of the online list. The selection parameter determines which documents will be included in the list, so it's up to you to understand if you want to display material documents, vendor documents, financial accounting documents that are related to the execution of the process. And of course, then this transaction report can be enriched with further parameters such as dates, master data, organizational data, and so on. You can see an example in this figure. In particular, in SAP, we have two different, two different formats to display an online list, which is the SAP list viewer, SAP list viewer here, and the ABAP list viewer grid control. I don't go too much in detail about this, but this is very intuitive. One works with codification in SAP, so you can display online list by choosing the codification of elements in SAP, while here with the SAP list viewer you can show online list by just making a screening of possible option within each field in the document. But I don't go too much in detail on this because it is not essential that you know the different reporting and according to the different formats in SAP. I want to conclude just to give you some, option that you can, some command that you can use while displaying a transactional report, in particular related to online list. Because the list viewer and link control provide, which is this bar, which will be displayed when you generate a report, provides several options for displaying the report output. In particular, you can see that you can select detail, and you will select a line on the report and drill down for more details. You can set filter, as you can limit the list only to items that meet specific value. You can, for example, the list can be restricted to purchase order where the quantity order exceeds a specific value. So just list the purchase order higher than $100,000. Or list can be sorted in ascending or descending order in a select column in order to create total, subtotal, and so on. Which is the command connecting to this. So you sort by ascending or descending order, and then you create according to this order total and subtotal partial value, or you can calculate also the total value for the column. Finally, you have some layout options that allow the user to change the appearance of the display. So the layout will show you available fields that can be included or excluded in the report. Fields can appear as column or can be removed, replaced, and so on, in order to make it more intuitive. And finally, you can also the possibility to export the data in various formats such as Word, Excel, or HTML language, or you can just send it by email in order to get stored in another place.